They believe life can surprise you at any age. I always thought there would come a day when I had everything figured out, a quiet, simple routine, free from the concerns and pressures of youth. But perhaps life doesn't work that way. Sometimes, moments arise that shake us, making us question our understanding of certain aspects of life. My name is Eileen, and I'm 63 years old. After a career as a school principal and raising 2 wonderful children, I thought I knew myself well. My spouse passed away 5 years ago, and since then, I've settled into a peaceful life with routines like morning walks, gardening, and staying connected with family. I believed excitement and spontaneity were things of the past, but recently something shifted in a way I can't fully grasp. It began subtly, a lingering gaze, a quiet moment, a connection that seemed harmless until it wasn't. My son Adam has a close friend named Caleb, who has been part of our family for years. He was like another son to me, someone I deeply trusted and respected. But one day something changed. There was a stillness between us, an unspoken tension neither of us knew how to confront. It's puzzling how a lifetime of stability and certainty can suddenly feel fragile and filled with questions. That day left me pondering what happened and why I'm still thinking about it. This is my story. My life isn't extraordinary, but it is fulfilling, and I like it that way. After over 30 years as a school administrator, I retired, seeking peace and quiet. My husband Neil passed away 5 years ago. He was a kind, steady man, and despite our differences, we deeply loved each other. Losing him was challenging, but I found strength in daily routines and my close bond with our children, especially my son Adam. Adam, now 35, is dependable and responsible, qualities Neil and I always admired. Despite living alone, Adam visits frequently, bringing warmth and laughter to my otherwise quiet home. His best friend Caleb often joins him. Caleb, now 37, is an engineer with a successful career. His calm and thoughtful demeanor reminds me of Neil. Over the years, I have appreciated the steady energy Caleb brings to our family. One day, after finishing some gardening, I decided to unwind with a cup of tea. Adam was out of town, and the house was unusually quiet. A knock at the door surprised me. It was Caleb. He mentioned dropping off some books he'd borrowed from Adam. Genuinely pleased to see him, I invited him in for tea. At first, our conversation was lighthearted, covering work, family, and general topics. But the atmosphere felt different. Maybe it was the quietness of the house or the relaxed tone of our conversation. As I handed him a cup of tea, our fingers brushed a small moment I dismissed at first. But as we continued talking, I noticed the warmth in his gaze, the way he leaned forward when I spoke, and the quiet laughter in his responses. An unspoken connection seemed to emerge, subtle yet undeniable. By the time Caleb left, I was left with a strange awareness, a feeling I hadn't anticipated. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was nothing more than a fleeting moment influenced by the stillness of the day. The memory stayed with me, lingering and leaving behind a mix of anticipation and unease. In the days that followed, I couldn't let go of that afternoon with Caleb. Despite my efforts to dismiss it as an ordinary interaction, the memory of his touch, his gaze, and the quiet intensity in his eyes remained vivid. I felt foolish for allowing my thoughts to drift to unfamiliar territory. Caleb was like family to Adam, a young man I had seen grow from a college student to a well-respected professional. Yet I couldn't ignore the small thrill I experienced in his presence, the sense of warmth and comfort that lingered long after he left. I wondered if he had felt it too, or if it was simply my imagination, a fleeting feeling stirred by loneliness or nostalgia. I told myself I was overthinking, but the thought stayed, an unanswered question in my mind. A week later, Caleb returned to drop off a book he had borrowed. He seemed at ease, and I invited him to sit for a while. The same warmth returned as we talked, our conversation flowing effortlessly from light topics to deeper, personal ones. He spoke of his career, his future plans, and the challenges he faced. As he shared, I felt a maternal pride, like watching someone you care for step into their own. But there was also something else, a growing awareness of the way he looked at me, his attentiveness, and the unspoken connection that felt both natural and unsettling. Over time, Caleb's visits became more frequent. Each one brought a mixture of excitement and guilt. I looked forward to his company, the understanding and warmth he brought to my life. Yet, I couldn't ignore a quiet fear that I was crossing a line, letting myself feel things that were not appropriate for our relationship. One evening, as we sat looking through old family photo albums, I realized how much I enjoyed his presence. We laughed and shared memories, and for a moment I felt a companionship I hadn't experienced in years. Then, as he leaned closer to see a photo, his arm brushed against mine, and I felt my heart race. It was such a small gesture, a fleeting connection, but the warmth of his touch sent a thrill through me I couldn't ignore. I glanced at him, our eyes met, and for a brief second, there was a bond that went beyond friendship, a silent, unspoken connection that left me both exhilarated and uneasy. I knew I needed to distance myself, to stop this before it grew into something more. Yet each time I resolved to end our interactions, I felt a pang of regret, longing for the warmth and connection he brought into my life. Caleb filled a void I hadn't acknowledged since Neil's passing, a quiet achy that had become part of my routine. His presence brought a lightness I hadn't felt in years, even as I wrestled with the inappropriateness of my emotions. One evening, while Adam was out of town, Caleb came by with groceries he had picked up for me. I invited him to stay for dinner, and we spent the evening cooking, sharing stories, and laughing. As the night grew quieter, our conversation became more reflective. Caleb opened up about his struggles, his loneliness, and the challenges of balancing his career and personal life. I listened, feeling a deep sense of empathy and understanding a connection that didn't need words. At one point, as I washed dishes, I felt Caleb's hand rest gently on my shoulder. The touch was light, reassuring, yet it sent a warmth through me I couldn't ignore. I turned to look at him, meeting his gaze. In that moment, I saw something reflected in his eyes, a quiet longing, an emotion that took my breath away. "I don't know how to put this into words," he said softly, his voice hesitant. "But I feel something between us. I'm not sure what it is, but I can't ignore it." My heart raced, a blend of astonishment and uncertainty washing over me. Panic began to build within me as I struggled to reject it, to dismiss it as something insignificant. But deep down, I knew that would be a lie. I looked at him and saw the vulnerability in his expression, mirroring the same uncertainty and longing that I was feeling. My voice, barely audible, broke the silence. "We can't. This isn't something we can pursue," he nodded in understanding, though his hand lingered on my shoulder, a quiet reassurance, yet filled with his own confusion. We stood there, silence enveloping us as we wrestled with the weight of our emotions and the reality of the line we had silently crossed. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped back, regret etched on his face. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell," he said softly. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way." I managed a small smile, acknowledging the complexity of the moment, and replied, "You didn't." Dinner was finished in an uneasy quiet, the air tense yet oddly comforting. I understood then that what had passed between us was real, yet utterly impossible. Without exchanging many words, we both knew that certain boundaries simply couldn't be crossed, no matter how tempting they might seem. In the weeks following, Caleb continued to visit, but our interactions were cautious, marked by an unspoken agreement to keep our emotions in check. The easy laughter and relaxed silences that once defined our visits were replaced by careful conversations, each of us acutely aware of the invisible line drawn between us. Yet, as much as we tried to ignore it, the tension was undeniable. A glance, a fleeting touch, or the way our conversations drifted into reflective territory, everything felt heavier, more charged. Each visit felt like treading a fine line between friendship and something deeper, something unspoken. I found myself yearning for the uncomplicated connection we once shared, a friendship now lost to the growing complexity of our emotions. One evening, as we discussed a book we'd both read, his hand brushed against mine. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt through me, reigniting feelings I was desperately trying to suppress. I looked at him, and our eyes met in a way that felt both tender and electric. He quickly glanced away, but the silence that followed was thick with understanding. We were both struggling to maintain the boundaries we'd set, even as the pull between us grew stronger. I thought often about putting an end to our meetings, creating distance to preserve the status quo, but each time I considered it, I felt an ache of regret. I had grown attached to these moments, the warmth, the companionship he brought, and the thought of losing that left me feeling hollow. In an effort to distract myself, I filled my days with new activities, like joining a local gardening club and taking long walks. But no matter how I tried, the connection between us lingered, undiminished, each time he visited. One Saturday, we found ourselves alone again, talking and laughing over a light-hearted topic. The moment felt easy, almost carefree, but an undercurrent of tension remained. I noticed it in the way his gaze lingered or how his smile softened, as though he, too, was trying to maintain the casualness of our friendship while struggling with the deeper bond that had formed. The unspoken agreement between us grew fragile, as though it might shatter at any moment. With every passing week, it felt as if we were approaching a point of no return, a moment where we would have to confront the emotions we were both carefully avoiding. I often caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, as if he, too, was questioning where this was heading. Each glance brought a rush of conflicting feelings: excitement, fear, and guilt, all mingling into a storm I couldn't quiet. I knew the emotions brewing within me were dangerous, capable of leading to consequences neither of us had intended or desired. Despite recognizing the risks, I couldn't bring myself to say the words that would end it, to draw a final, definitive line between us. The tension between us continued to build, transforming our interactions into a delicate dance of restraint and quiet yearning. We held ourselves back, painfully aware of the boundary we couldn't cross, yet unable to sever the connection that had drawn us so close. It was a bittersweet, tangled mix of longing and restraint, a complicated, persistent ache neither of us could escape. I often lay awake at night, wondering how long we could sustain this fragile dance, how long we could ignore the emotions simmering beneath the surface. Deep down, I knew it was unsustainable. We were playing with fire, and sooner or later, one of us would have to make the difficult decision to step back, to let go. As much as I dreaded that moment, it was becoming an inevitable reality I could no longer ignore. After weeks of maintaining this precarious balance, the weight of guilt began to press down on me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was betraying something important: Adam's trust, my own values, and perhaps even Caleb, by letting myself become so emotionally attached. I realized I was indulging in feelings that had no place in our lives, something that could only lead to pain and regret. Yet, each time I considered ending this connection, I felt a deep sadness, a reluctance to let go of the bond that had brought such warmth and meaning to my days. I began to reflect on my emotions, questioning what had led me to this attachment. Perhaps it was the loneliness that had quietly settled into my life after Neil's passing, a quiet ache I hadn't fully acknowledged. Caleb had filled that void, bringing a sense of companionship and understanding I hadn't realized I was missing. Even as I recognized this, I knew my feelings were inappropriate, that I was risking too much for a connection with no future. One evening, sitting alone in the living room, I decided it was time to confront my emotions. I needed to understand what I was truly seeking. I realized that while I valued Caleb's presence, my feelings stemmed from my own loneliness, a longing for companionship that had led me down this path. Caleb had simply been the one to fill that void, offering comfort in a way I hadn't expected. Determined to move forward, I resolved to put distance between us, to create the space I needed to let go of the feelings I had developed. The decision was painful and left me feeling hollow, but I knew it was the right choice. I couldn't continue living with the guilt, the sense that I was compromising my own values. I needed to find a way to heal my loneliness and rediscover my sense of self without depending on someone else to fill that void. The next day, I prepared to speak with Caleb to explain that we needed to maintain some distance to preserve our friendship and respect the lives we had built. It was a difficult but necessary step toward finding peace. When Caleb arrived that evening, I invited him in, feeling the weight of the moment. This was our goodbye, and we both knew it. Sitting in the living room, the tension between us was palpable, shaped by the emotions that had built over the past months. Struggling to find the right words, I finally began, my voice soft but firm. "Caleb, I've been thinking a lot about everything about our connection, and I think it's best if we create some space. I've valued our friendship so much, and I don't want to lose that, but I also don't want things to become more complicated." His expression was filled with understanding and sadness. "I understand, Miss Caldwell. I never meant to cause any tension or make things difficult." I felt a pang of regret and responded gently, "You haven't done anything wrong, Caleb. I think I let myself become too attached, and I need to step back to find peace within myself." He nodded softly, and for a moment we sat in silence, a quiet acknowledgement that this was the end of our chapter. "I'll miss you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll miss you too," I replied, my throat tight with emotion. "But this is for the best. It's what we both need." We shared a lingering look, processing the finality of the moment before he rose to leave. He gave me a gentle, warm hug and embrace that felt like a farewell to everything we had shared. When the door closed behind him, a wave of emptiness washed over me, a hollow ache that I knew would take time to heal. Yet, amidst the sadness, I felt a quiet strength, a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in weeks. I was confident that we had made the right decision, taking a step toward preserving our values and the integrity of our lives. In the days that followed, I reflected often on our bond, the moments that brought us close and the emotions that had threatened to pull us apart. I realized our connection, while intense, had taught me the importance of boundaries and the need to protect the relationships that define us. Though I missed Caleb's presence, I knew ending things was the right choice. It allowed me to move forward with clarity and purpose. As I looked toward the future, I felt a quiet determination to heal the loneliness that had led me down this path and to embrace the lessons I had learned. With time, I knew I could find peace within myself and move forward, stronger and wiser from the experience.